I can still hear the words, as clear as if she were standing behind me right now, whispering them into my ear with that slow, deliberate calm she always used when she wanted me to feel trapped. I own you forever. It wasn't said during a fight. There was no shouting, no slammed doors, no tears. No, it was a quiet night, the kind that should have been harmless. We were sitting on the couch in the living room. A lamp was on in the corner, casting that honey-colored light that usually made the room feel warm. But in that moment, it seemed to turn everything dim, almost suffocating. She had her hand on my wrist, light but firm, not affectionate, possessive, like a handcuff disguised as a caress. Her eyes didn't blink as she said it. Her lips barely moved, as though she wasn't telling me something new, but simply stating a fact I'd been too foolish to accept until then. I remember the way my chest tightened, the way my vision seemed to tunnel. I couldn't hear the TV anymore, couldn't hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, just the thudding of my heart, hammering against my ribs, drowning out rational thought. I owned nothing in that moment, not even myself. For a while, I sat there frozen, caught between disbelief and recognition. A part of me wanted to laugh, to shake it off as some twisted joke. Another part, the deeper, quieter part, knew she wasn't joking. She had been preparing me for that statement for years. It wasn't born in that instant. It was the sum of 1,000 little cuts. Looking back, the evidence was everywhere. The subtle way she had stripped me down, thread by thread. How she convinced me to stop calling old friends. They don't care about you like I do. How she had me hand over control of our finances. You're terrible with money. Let me take care of it. How she laughed at my hobbies, mocked my attempts to keep small pieces of myself alive until I finally let them die. At the time, I thought compromise was a language of love. I thought sacrifice was proof of devotion. But sitting there, with her words crawling under my skin like a brand, I realized compromise had become erasure, and sacrifice had become slavery. I own you forever. The phrase repeated in my mind like a bell tolling in an empty church. I remember staring down at my left hand, the wedding band glinting under the lamplight. For years I had worn it like a badge of honor, a promise kept. But that night, it felt like a shackle. My finger itched beneath the metal, and for the first time, I had the urge to rip it off and fling it across the room. But I didn't. I stayed still, silent, as if speaking might confirm what she had said. When she finally released my wrist and leaned back, there was no satisfaction on her face, just certainty, as if she had signed a deed to my very soul and filed it away somewhere safe. She turned her attention back to the TV, leaving me stranded inside myself. The room around me began to feel smaller. The walls of our home, once a place of comfort, loomed like prison bars. The air smelled faintly of her perfume, cloying and sharp, like smoke lingering after a fire. That was the moment I realized I wasn't loved. I was owned, and ownership is not affection. It is possession. I don't know how long I sat there before I finally excused myself, retreating to the bedroom. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, unable to close my eyes. My mind churned, replaying years of conversations, gestures, silences. How had I let this happen? Had I been blind, or had I simply refused to see? I thought about the small lies I had told myself. She's just strong-willed. She just loves me too much. She just wants what's best for us. Lies I had swallowed because the alternative, that I had given myself to someone who would rather control me than love me, was too devastating to accept. But denial was no longer an option. I remember rolling onto my side, my hand brushing against a nightstand drawer. Inside, buried beneath receipts and loose change, was a watch my father had given me when I turned 18. I hadn't worn it in years. She said it was old-fashioned, that it didn't suit me. I had listened like I always did. That night, though, I opened the drawer and touched it, cold metal against my fingertips. A reminder that once, before her, I had belonged to myself. I didn't take it out. Not yet. But I left the drawer slightly open, as if acknowledging it was there was enough to anchor me. I wish I could say that moment gave me strength, but the truth is, it only deepened my despair. Because strength requires freedom, and freedom felt unreachable. She had wrapped her roots so tightly around me that I couldn't tell where I ended and she began. And then, just when my thoughts began to spiral into hopelessness, her phone buzzed. It was close to midnight. She had left it on the coffee table when she went to shower. Normally, I never touch her phone. She guarded it like a dragon guards gold, and I had learned not to question that. But the screen lit up in the dark room, the name bold against the black background. A man's name, one I didn't recognize. My breath caught. I froze, staring at it, my heart rattling in my chest. I didn't pick it up, didn't dare. But in that moment, I knew something was coming. Something worse than her words, worse than her ownership. The kind of truth you can't unsee once it's revealed. And lying there in the half-light of our bedroom, with her perfume still clinging to the air, I realized my story wasn't about love anymore. It was about survival. When I think back to the beginning, it almost feels like someone else's life. A younger man's life. A man who still believed in rescue. In the kind of love that arrives when you need it most and patches all the holes you've been bleeding through. That man was me. I met her in the most ordinary of places. A bookstore cafe on a gray, rainy afternoon. I wasn't looking for anyone. Truth be told, I was barely looking at myself in the mirror back then. I had come out of a breakup that gutted me. The kind of heartbreak that leaves you questioning your worth. My career was stalled. I was working in a job I didn't care about, saving little, drifting. My family and I weren't on speaking terms after an argument that turned into silence, and silence hardened into distance. I was, in every sense, untethered. She walked in carrying that certainty some people seem to be born with. Her hair was damp from the rain, her presence impossible to ignore. I noticed how people turned to look at her, not just because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she moved as though the world belonged to her. I can still remember what she ordered: black coffee, no sugar. She noticed the book I was reading, some obscure novel about loss and identity, and she commented on it with a knowing smile, as if she understood me already. That was her gift, making you feel seen, not with shallow flattery, but with the kind of focused attention you crave when you've been starved of it. We talked for hours that day, about books, about life, about dreams we half believed in. She asked questions no one else asked. She tilted her head just so when I spoke, as if my words carried weight. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt important. Looking back, I see how desperately I clung to that feeling. Our relationship moved quickly, almost too quickly, but I didn't question it. When someone shines a light into the dark cave you've been trapped in, you don't ask if the lantern is borrowed or stolen. You just follow it out. At first, the changes felt like growth. She encouraged me to dress sharper, to present myself better. She teased me about my old sneakers until I bought leather shoes. She said my bachelor apartment was depressing, and soon I was spending most nights at her place. Then, practically living there, she offered to handle the bills when we decided to move in together. "You hate numbers," she said, "and I'm good at them." It felt like a kindness. But kindness can become a chain if you don't notice the weight. I gave up hobbies because she dismissed them. The guitar I used to play gathered dust. She called it noise. The weekends I spent hiking with friends became rarer. She didn't like them, so they acted single and weren't serious about life. Eventually, I stopped going. Piece by piece, I abandoned the man I had been, believing it was the cost of becoming the man she wanted me to be. And isn't that what love is? I told myself, sacrifice, compromise. My mother noticed first. I remember sitting at her kitchen table one Sunday afternoon, months into the relationship. She stirred her tea, studying me with those sharp maternal eyes. "You've changed," she said. "In a good way?" I asked, trying to smile. She hesitated. "I don't know yet." I brushed it off. She didn't understand. She'd never seen me so committed, so devoted. But even as I defended my choices, I felt the sting of her words. My best friend, Mark, was less gentle. "She's controlling, man," he told me one night over beers. "You don't laugh the same around her. It's like you're careful." I rolled my eyes, but inside his words dug at me. Careful. Yes, I was careful. Choosing my words, my tone, even my silence, because upsetting her always felt like losing more than I could afford. Still, I stayed. I told myself they didn't see the whole picture. They didn't see how she could be tender, how she could disarm me with affection when she wanted to. They didn't see the way she'd press her face into my chest and sigh as though I was her anchor. But anchors can sink ships too. I remember one night in particular, a small but pivotal memory. I had pulled out the watch my father gave me, the one buried in the drawer now. I had polished it, thinking I might start wearing again. She walked in, saw it on my wrist, and smirked. "That old thing," she said. "It doesn't suit you. You look better without it." It was such a small comment, said casually, but I took it off. I put it back in the drawer. I didn't argue. And that's how it always went. My preferences fading under hers, my voice softening until it barely existed. Every surrender seemed harmless, even logical, but they stacked like bricks in a wall, and one day I woke up to find myself standing on the wrong side of it. And yet I believed that love required me to hand over my hours, my choices, my identity. That giving her the key to every door of my life was proof I was loyal, trustworthy, worthy of her. I handed over my watch, my time. I handed over my friends, my laughter. I handed over my family, my voice. And she took it all with that same calm certainty she later used to tell me. "I own you forever." At the time, I didn't see ownership. I saw security. She had woven herself into every corner of my life until there was no me without her. That was the brilliance of it. I believed I had built a home with her, when really I had been building my own cage. Sometimes I wonder if she knew from the start what she was doing. If, even in that bookstore cafe, she recognized the vulnerability in me and decided she could mold it, bend it, keep it, or if it happened slowly, even to her without intent. Does it matter? All I know is that by the time her words finally cut through the fog, "I own you forever," I had already given her almost everything. My only currency left was time, and the watch in the drawer was a silent reminder of how much of it I had already spent on her. And maybe that's why I couldn't sleep the night she said it. Why I lay there staring at the ceiling, hearing my mother's voice, my best friend's warnings, the echoes of my own laughter from a version of me I barely remembered. I realized then that ownership doesn't start with chains. It starts with choices. Small, quiet choices. And I had made them all. I had handed over my life, and she had taken it. I didn't go looking for proof. Proof came to me. It was late, sometime around 3 a.m. I couldn't sleep again. Sleep had become a stranger by then, refusing to visit no matter how heavy my body felt. The ceiling above our bed had become a canvas where my mind projected every regret, every suspicion, every word she had ever said that I should have questioned but didn't. That night, I rolled out of bed quietly, careful not to wake her. She was curled on her side, her breathing even, the faint scent of her cologne-heavy perfume still clinging to the sheets. I padded barefoot into the living room and sat down on the couch, staring into the dark. And then I saw it. Her phone, left face down on the coffee table. For years, I had respected that barrier. I never asked to see it. She was ferociously protective of her privacy, and I told myself that was normal, healthy even. We trust each other, I used to think, but trust had rotted into doubt. Her words, "I own you forever," were still echoing inside me, and the name I'd seen light up her screen a week earlier kept gnawing at my brain. My hand hovered over the phone. My chest tightened, my palms damp. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Once I looked, there'd be no way back. But curiosity and dread are twin monsters. They feed on each other. I picked it up. Her passcode was the same as always. She had never changed it, maybe because she believed I'd never cross that line. But I did. My thumb slid across the screen, and suddenly, the dark world inside her phone lit up in my hands. At first, I told myself I'd only look for a second, just to ease my mind, just to prove my suspicions wrong. But the first message I opened wasn't innocent. It was him, the man whose name I hadn't recognized. The words on the screen were playful, flirtatious, threaded with a kind of intimacy I hadn't seen from her in years. My stomach dropped. My vision blurred. I scrolled. The deeper I went, the worse it became. Photos, jokes at my expense, secrets about me, things I had told her in confidence, shared like cheap gossip, and then, buried between the lines of digital affection, there was talk of money, transfers, plans I knew nothing about. It wasn't just infidelity. It was betrayal in every language, emotional, financial, spiritual. She hadn't just stepped out of our marriage. She had gutted it and left me standing in the hollow shell. I dropped the phone back onto the table, my hands trembling. My throat burned as if I'd swallowed fire. I couldn't breathe. I stumbled into the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. The tiles beneath my feet felt cold, unforgiving. The refrigerator hummed, the only sound in the room besides my ragged breathing. I wanted to scream, but the sound wouldn't come. My body shook silently, tears burning at the corners of my eyes, though I refused to let them fall. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms, tiny crescents of pain anchoring me to reality. That's when I heard her voice behind me. "You're up late." I turned. She stood in the doorway, her hair messy from sleep, her expression unreadable. She glanced at the phone on the table, then back at me. "You went through it, didn't you?" Her tone wasn't fearful, not apologetic. It was flat, calm, almost amused. I couldn't speak. My mouth opened, but no words came. She tilted her head, arms crossed casually over her chest. "You're paranoid. Always have been. You read too much into things." My silence gave me away. Her lips curled into that smirk I'd come to hate, the one that said she was 3 steps ahead of me. "Even if I did, what are you going to do?" she said softly, stepping closer. "You need me. You have no one else." It was like being stabbed twice. The first wound from betrayal itself, the second from her certainty that I would never leave. And the cruelest part? A piece of me believed her. I sank into a chair, my head in my hands. She brushed past me, picked up her phone, and slipped it into her pocket. Just like that, the conversation was over for her. She went back to bed as if nothing had happened, leaving me shattered in the kitchen's half-light. That night broke something in me. The days that followed were a blur. I went to work, but I wasn't really there. I sat in my car for hours after my shift ended, unable to drive home, staring at the steering wheel until the sky turned black. At home, I drifted from room to room like a ghost, watching her move through the house as though she owned not only the walls but the very air I breathed. I stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping altogether. My body was there, but my soul had checked out. I became what I later called the hollow man. Sometimes I would catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror and not recognize the face looking back. My eyes looked sunken, vacant, my shoulders slumped. I looked like someone who had been emptied out and left behind. And yet, somewhere beneath all that despair, something stirred. A flicker, a whisper. One night, unable to bear the silence, I opened the drawer by my bed. The watch was still there, untouched. I pulled it out and fastened it around my wrist. The ticking was faint but steady, a rhythm against my skin. A reminder that time was still moving, even if I wasn't. That life was passing, with or without me. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to that quiet tick, tick, tick. It wasn't much, but it was something. Proof that I was still alive. Proof that I could still choose. It didn't make me strong overnight. It didn't erase the hollow feeling or the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. But it planted a seed, a small, stubborn seed. Because as much as she wanted me to believe she owned me forever, the truth was simpler. She only owned what I had given her. And maybe, just maybe, I could take it back. When people imagine leaving, they think it's sudden. A slammed door, a packed suitcase, the sound of tires squealing into the night. For me, it wasn't like that. It was quiet, secretive, a rebellion not of noise, but of silence. Because after she told me she owned me forever, after I saw the proof on her phone and endured the humiliation of her smirk, I knew I couldn't fight her head on. She thrived on confrontation. She could twist any argument until I was the villain and she was the victim. If I left recklessly, she'd destroy me. Financially, emotionally, socially. She held too many strings. So I learned patience. It started small. I began tucking away cash. $5 here, 20 there. Whenever I paid for groceries in cash, I'd ask for change and slip a few bills into the lining of an old jacket she never touched. It was absurdly small at first, the kind of money a teenager might stash for gas and fast food. But each foldable felt like a step toward air, a step away from suffocation. Next came the documents. Late at night, while she scrolled on her phone or slept, I quietly copied bank statements, insurance papers, anything that had my name attached. I slipped them into a manila folder and hid it beneath the spare tire of my car. My heart raced each time, certain she would walk in and catch me hunched over the copier like a criminal in my own home. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was sneaking around not because I was guilty, but because I was desperate to reclaim the life that was mine to begin with. I started rehearsing normalcy. I smiled when she demanded it. I laughed when she made her barbed jokes. I let her believe she had broken me entirely. But behind the mask I was planning, there was one night I'll never forget. Early spring, when the air outside still bit with cold, but the first hint of warmth clung stubbornly to the breeze. She had gone to bed after another late-night phone call she thought I didn't notice. I sat alone in the living room, staring at my reflection in the darkened TV screen. My wedding ring gleamed faintly under the lamp. I twisted around my finger, over and over, like it was both tether and key. It had once meant forever. Now it meant ownership. A shackled dress and sentiment. I slid it off for the first time in years and set it on the coffee table. The bare skin of my finger tingled, raw, as though I had peeled away a part of myself. And that's when I knew I was ready. The actual escape came at dawn. I hadn't slept all night. I'd laid there, staring at the ceiling, the watch on my wrist ticking steady as a war drum. I waited until her breathing deepened into that heavy rhythm of deep sleep. Then, slowly, carefully, I slid out of bed. I didn't pack a suitcase. That would have been too loud, too obvious. I had already stashed essentials in a storage unit across town. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, copies of documents, and the cash I'd been hiding. All I needed now was to leave. I put on jeans, a sweatshirt, and my father's watch. I slipped my shoes on by the door, each movement deliberate, silent. The house felt like it was holding its breath, the walls leaning in, listening. Before I left, I paused at the threshold, glancing back. The life I had built, or rather, the cage I had constructed, sat in stillness. The couch, the photos on the wall, the bed where she slept, all of it seemed foreign, like a stage set from someone else's play. My eyes fell on the wedding ring still sitting on the coffee table. I almost took it, almost slipped it back on out of habit, but then I turned away. Some symbols need to stay buried where they lie. I walked out the door and didn't look back. The sky was a pale gray as I got into my car. The streets were empty, silent except for the hum of the engine as I pulled away. Each block I passed felt like a layer of weight lifting from my chest. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. The first few days were brutal. I checked into a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind where the carpet smells faintly of mildew and the air conditioner rattles louder than the TV. I lay on the stiff mattress staring at the ceiling, wondering if she had woken yet, if she had noticed the emptiness beside her. My phone buzzed with calls, texts, all from her. I didn't answer. I turned it off and dropped it in the nightstand drawer, as though burying it could bury her hold on me. I ate from gas stations. Chips, bottled water, microwave burritos. Humiliating meals for a grown man who once prided himself on cooking Sunday dinners. But every bite, however stale, tasted of independence. There were moments I nearly caved. The loneliness was suffocating, the silence deafening. I had built my world around her, and now, without her, it was as though I had no map, no compass. I questioned myself constantly. Had I overreacted? Was I throwing away stability for pride? But then I would glance at my wrist. The watch ticking, steady, reminded me that time was precious. My hours belonged to me again, however small, however uncertain. And that was worth every moment of hunger, every restless night in a dingy room. In those early weeks, kindness found me in small ways. There was a diner near the motel, one of those 24-hour places with cracked vinyl booths and the smell of grease clinging to the air. I went there often, nursing cheap coffee while pretending to read the paper. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes, never pressed me with questions. She just refilled my cup with a small nod, as if sensing I needed to comfort a routine. One night, she set a slice of pie in front of me without asking. "On the house," she said. That small gesture nearly broke me, because it reminded me I wasn't invisible. I wasn't gone. A week later, I reached out to Mark, my best friend I had abandoned years ago. He didn't hesitate. He offered me his couch, his fridge, his silence when I needed it, his company when I couldn't stand being alone. He never said, "I told you so." He just said, "You're here now. That's what matters." It was in that silence, in those small acts of kindness, that I began to breathe again. The world no longer smelled of her perfume. The air outside smelled of rain, of earth, of life. My lungs felt fuller. My steps felt heavier but more real. I began writing in a journal, scraps of thought, fragments of memory, plans I wasn't ready to say out loud. The pages became my confessional, my map, my proof that I still existed. And slowly, very slowly, the silence that once terrified me became sanctuary. I realized survival wasn't just leaving her. Survival was remembering who I was before her and rebuilding in piece by fragile piece. At first, I thought leaving her was a victory, that crossing the threshold and driving into the pale morning light would be enough to set me free. But what I didn't realize was that the escape was only the beginning. Freedom without identity is just another kind of prison, and I didn't know who I was anymore. The man in the mirror was a stranger. He had lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a sag in his shoulders, a weight he carried without realizing. He looked older, weaker, hollow, like he'd been drained of marrow and left to stand, a husk in jeans and a sweatshirt. I'd stand there some mornings in Mark's bathroom, staring at my reflection, toothbrush dangling from my hand, and I would ask the man in the glass, "Who are you without her?" The first answer was silence. The second was fear. But then came anger. I remembered the way she'd said it. "I own you forever." The words weren't just a threat. They were a brand. She wanted me to believe I was nothing without her, that my body, my time, my choices all belonged to her. The ring she had slipped onto my finger years ago had been less of a vow and more of a shackle, a declaration of ownership disguised as devotion. The day I left on the coffee table was the day I loosened the chain. But I hadn't broken it. Not yet. The first crack in my prison came one afternoon when Mark dragged me out to his garage. "You're rotting in there," he said. "Come help me with this." This was a beat-up motorcycle, an old Triumph Bonneville he'd been tinkering with for years. I had no business with engines. My hands had grown soft from years of pushing papers, cooking dinners, appeasing moods. But there was something meditative about it. The smell of oil and gasoline, the grit under my nails, the weight of tools in my hands. The first time the engine coughed and roared to life, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in years: control. My hands had built something. My hands had woken it from silence. It lit something inside me. From there, I sought out more. Books I'd always wanted to read but never had time for. Long walks at dawn, when the world was still wrapped in silence. Journaling not just to bleed, but to rebuild. Plans, goals, fragments of the man I wanted to become. The more I filled my days with purpose, the quieter her voice became in my head. But healing wasn't linear. Some nights, I'd wake in a cold sweat, heart hammering, convinced she was standing over me, ready to drag me back. I'd smell her perfume in the dark, hear her laugh echoing in my skull. Trauma lingers like smoke. You may leave the fire, but it clings to your clothes long after. On those nights, I'd sit with my father's watch in my hand, listening to the steady tick. A reminder that time moves forward whether I do or not. That every second spent in fear was another second stolen. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I made a decision. I wouldn't just survive her. I would dismantle her hold on me piece by piece until there was nothing left. The turning point came in the form of an old box. Mark had cleared out his attic and found it, Stuff I'd left years ago when I'd first moved in with her. Inside were photos, notebooks, even a guitar I'd once played until my fingers blistered. I sat cross-legged on the floor, going through it all, and it felt like looking through a time capsule of the man I used to be. There was one photo in particular. Me at 25, grinning like a fool at some backyard barbecue, arms slung over Mark's shoulders. My smile was wide, unguarded. My eyes were bright. That man didn't know what it felt like to be owned. That man didn't know the weight of silence or the sting of betrayal. And yet, he was still in there somewhere. Buried, but not gone. I taped the photo to the bathroom mirror. Every morning, I forced myself to look from him to me, and back again, not with regret, but with a promise. I would build a bridge between us. I would meet that man again, not as who I was, but as who I was becoming. With clarity came strategy. I contacted a lawyer. It was terrifying, sitting in that sterile office, spilling years of manipulation and betrayal into words. My voice shook as I told her about the financial control, the isolation, the way she had stripped me of everything that made me independent. The lawyer didn't flinch. She nodded, calm, composed, like she'd heard it all before. That in itself was a strange comfort. Proof that I wasn't the first to crawl out of this kind of wreckage. "Do you want revenge?" she asked softly after I finished. I shook my head. "I want my life back." She smiled, small but genuine. "Then we'll take it back. Legally, piece by piece." And so I began gathering proof. Bank records, emails, anything I could recover. Every document felt like a brick pulled from the foundation of the house she'd built around me. But beyond the paperwork, there was something deeper happening. For the first time in years, I felt powerful, not because I was hurting her, but because I was reclaiming myself. That summer, I took the motorcycle out onto the open road. I'll never forget that ride. The wind tearing at my jacket, the asphalt stretching endlessly ahead, the horizon burning gold with the setting sun. For the first time in over a decade, I felt unchained. No phone buzzing in my pocket with demands. No voice in my ear telling me I belonged to her. Just me, the engine, and the road. I laughed into the wind. A raw, unpolished sound that startled even me. It was then I realized the truth. She hadn't owned me forever. She had owned the version of me who let himself be owned. But that man was gone. In his place was someone stronger, sharper, alive. The ring was the final piece. One evening, I drove back to the house. Not to see her, not to speak, but to take back the last symbol of her control. She wasn't home. I still had a key. Walking inside was like stepping into a mausoleum. The furniture was the same, the photos still hanging, but it all felt like a museum of a life I no longer lived. Dustier, smaller, emptier than I remembered. And there, on the coffee table, was the ring, exactly where I'd left it months before. Untouched, abandoned, like a relic of some failed religion. I picked it up, rolled it between my fingers. It no longer felt heavy. It no longer burned against my skin. It was just metal, just a circle, nothing more. I slipped it into my pocket, not to wear, but to remind myself, ownership only works if you accept the terms. And I no longer did. By the time autumn came, I could look into the mirror and recognize a man staring back. Not entirely the carefree boy in the photograph, but something better. A man who had burned, cracked, rebuilt. A man who knew the weight of silence, but had chosen to fill it with his own voice. The man in the mirror no longer looked hollow. He looked alive, and he was ready to confront her, ready to close the book she thought she would write forever, ready to prove that ownership ends a moment you decide it does. I always imagined the end would be explosive, that the day I finally faced her, the air would split with shouting, dishes would shatter against walls, and all the years of silence would erupt into a war of words. But when the time came, it wasn't fire. It was ice. The courthouse was beige and sterile, its walls humming faintly with the sound of fluorescent lights. I sat at the long table, paper spread neatly before me, the weight of months of preparation pressing down like armor. My father's watch ticked steadily on my wrist. Each second counted. Each second carried me further from the boy who once thought love meant obedience. Across the room, she sat in a sharp gray suit. Her hair was perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate, her back rigid like a statue. If someone had walked in blind, they might have mistaken her for the victim, the wronged wife, composed and dignified. That was her gift. Deception dresses elegance. But I could see through it now. Her eyes flicked to me. Just for a moment. There was recognition, yes, but there was also something new. A hesitation, a flicker of doubt. She had never seen me like this before. Not slouched, not shrinking, not broken. I sat tall, my jaw firm, my voice steady as I answered the lawyer's questions. For the first time, I wasn't performing for her approval. I wasn't bending to keep the peace. I was here for me. The proceedings dragged on. She tried to weave her stories, to paint me as irresponsible, dependent, ungrateful. Each accusation was a dagger aimed at the man I used to be. And perhaps a year ago, I would have bled from every wound. But now, I had proof. Emails where she mocked me to her friends for not making enough money. Bank records showing how she drained accounts. All in her name. Testimony from neighbors who had watched her belittle me in public. Every lie she spoke crumbled under the weight of evidence. Every mask she wore cracked a little more. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to humiliate her. The truth was loud enough. When it was over, when the judge's gavel struck and the terms were final, it felt less like victory and more like release. The legal ties were severed. Her claim of ownership dissolved into nothing more than ink on paper. But the real confrontation, the one I had carried in my chest for years, was still waiting. It happened in the parking lot. She followed me out, heels striking sharply against concrete. "So this is it?" she demanded, her voice low but sharp. "This is what you wanted? To humiliate me in front of strangers." I turned. For the first time in years, I looked her in the eye without flinching. "I didn't humiliate you," I said quietly. "You did that yourself." I just stopped covering it up. Her jaw tightened. I could see the fury simmering beneath her skin. But there was something else, too. Panic. She wasn't used to this version of me. "You think you've won," she hissed. "You think walking away makes you free? You'll come crawling back. You always do." I slipped my hand into my pocket, pulled out the ring. The same ring I had once worn like a chain. The same ring I had left behind. I held it up between us, the metal glinting in the pale light. "This," I said, "was never a promise. It was a leash, and I'm done wearing it." Her eyes widened as I dropped it onto the asphalt. The small clink echoed louder than any shout. For a long moment, she just stared. Then she bent down as if to pick it up, but her hand froze halfway. She couldn't bring herself to touch it, and I realized then that it wasn't me who was owned. It was her, owned by her need for control, her hunger to dominate, her fear of being left with nothing but herself. I turned and walked away. For once, I didn't look back. Closure didn't come in a single burst. It came slowly, like dawn bleeding across the horizon. That evening, I stood in my apartment, staring at myself in the bathroom mirror. The photo of my younger self was still taped there. But now, when I compared the two men, the boy with bright eyes and the man with scars, I didn't see loss. I saw evolution. The man in the mirror wasn't hollow anymore. He wasn't a ghost. He was flesh, blood, bone. He was someone who had walked through fire and come out forged, not broken. I thought of the house I had left behind, the walls that had once felt like prison bars. I thought of the nights filled with her perfume, her voice echoing in my skull. All of it, ashes now, echoes fading into silence. I lifted my wrist and listened to the steady tick of my father's watch, a reminder that time doesn't stop for pain. It keeps moving, and so must I. Weeks later, I rode the motorcycle out to the cliffs overlooking the ocean. The sun dipped low, painting the water in streaks of gold and crimson. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the ring. I hadn't thrown it away that day in the parking lot. I had kept it, waiting for the right moment, holding it in my hand. I thought about everything it represented. The ownership, the lies, the weight of silence. Then I thought about what I had gained. Freedom, self-respect, a life that was mine again. I drew back my arm and hurled it out into the sea. The metal caught the last rays of sunlight before vanishing into the waves. Gone. I breathed deep, the salt air filling my lungs, and for the first time in years, the weight was gone too. Not silence, not emptiness, just space. Space for something new. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need her to suffer. Her life was her own punishment, tangled in the web she had spun. What I needed was this: the road stretching out ahead, the wind in my face, the knowledge that I was no longer anyone's possession. I was free, and freedom, I realized, was the only thing worth owning,